What's up, everybody? John Maddox here, coming at you with another late-night logical, plausible, probable. We're going to be having an open mic discussion. You never know where we might end up. But I will tell you this, before we're done, we will have put some Evos in their place, because when I'm finished, you done.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a impromptu logical plausible probable. It's kind of impromptu and doing it right now because I have some time. I was actually supposed to have done this review like a week ago. I'm feeling pretty bad about this. So we're going to get this knocked out, at least part one knocked out today, and then hopefully do a little short open mic discussion after I get done. And then I got to roll out here about 2 o'clock my time. So we'll see if we can get this going. So for those of you who have been paying attention to my channel, you know that I posted on my comment or my community, did a community post recently, telling people to go watch the Ken Ammi lecture on metaphysical apologetics, and specifically in regards to atheistic evolution and how it is such a fundamental part of their worldview in spite of their denial. And I think he did a fantastic job on his overarching concept, the succinctness, and just the excellent culmination of the standard talking points that we hear ad nauseum from the Evo-Atheists on YouTube, and then issuing great counters and general responses. So I'm going to, without further ado, let's get into this. And I want to say what's up to everybody in the side chat. Thanks so much for joining us for today's stream. I'm seeing Honesty Angel. What's up? Heaven Rules All. Haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? Dustin Buck is here. Jungle Jargon. Redefined Living. Hurricane Havoc's in the house. What's going on, y'all? Mr. Greeny. Andrew Coffin. We got 2 members in here. What's up? What's up? Bubblegum Gun is here. How y'all doing? Appreciate everybody for joining us. See Vector's here as well. God is now here. And how the one and only Speed of Pudding is in the house as well. Okay, so let's get into this. Hopefully, I will be giving Mike some good content to review in his next weather report, as I'm sure what I'm about to show you guys will cause lots and lots of triggering in the Evo-Atheist camp. So let's go ahead and do this. Get all this going. All right, here we go.
Thank you so much. I did refer to MetaApologetics because that's my point tonight, is to go meta level, right? Like, for me, I've heard dozens of discussions that are extremely detailed about biology or evolution, and it's not my thing. Okay, when they get like super detailed, that's just way beyond me. So I'm always thinking about, well, how can I deal with issues that are kind of beyond me when it gets to the super detailed level? When it's the kind of thing, there's some things I can wrap my head around in detail. Sometimes some I can't. You know, we're all like that. We have certain things we can focus on and certain not. So then, how about a meta level issue, right? Because for instance, there are philosophers of biology, if you can believe that. And so that's the kind of thing they're doing. They're talking about the worldview, the philosophy, the big picture ideas. And so that's why I thought it'd be important to present a talk like this. So those of us who are not willing or able to get into that sort of level of detail. I mean, now we even have like a microbiologist, you know, what's next? Quantum biology. I mean, we already have exobiologists who pretty much do nothing, right?
Well, he makes an interesting point there about quantum biology, which I find very interesting because I have had interactions with folks who claim to know about biological systems, even supposed quote unquote experts. And when you bring up things like quantum biology, quantum enzymes, the different processes that are happening on the quantum level, quantum coherence, et cetera, in relation to something like photosynthesis, they don't know what the heck you're talking about, or completely deny that it's even something that must be accounted for. And irony of ironies, that's an entirely new discipline that's been around for I think a little over a decade at this point. It's really starting to expand dramatically. There's books written on the subject. There's papers out the wazoo coming out on it, and you know, in a variety of applications of how, you know, quantum mechanics is applicable to biological systems. And basically, what that, one of the many things that means is we don't know nearly as much as we think we know. However, the intricacies, the complexity, and the purposeful arrangement of parts that is necessary for the systems to work is it's blowing the mind, shall we say. And anybody who wants to deny that having to be accounted for is living in a fantasy land of denial, which, you know, I may have a few acronyms for that, which we'll get to here shortly.
because anyhow. So now, does anyone recognize the phrase changes to allele frequencies? Changes to allele frequencies. Okay, a couple hundred of you do, okay. I'm bringing that up because nowadays, if you ask somebody, well, what do you mean when you say evolution? They're most likely to say, I'm referring to changes in allele frequencies. Okay, so that's kind of like to get us up to date, because really all this stuff about was Darwin right, was Darwin wrong, that's virtually irrelevant anymore. Yes, Darwin's skeleton still does prop up the theory of evolution, but you know, we've had neo-Darwinism, we've had Evo-Devo, we had all these competing theories to kind of try to fix the mess he made, is the way that I would put it. And so this is the current definition that's really popular, changes in allele frequencies. In fact, somebody online told me, I'll give you $100 if you can correctly define evolution in a couple of short sentences. And I said, well, there's many definitions of evolutions, from origin of species by means of natural selection to changes in allele frequencies, etc. And by the way, no, I didn't even get 75 shekels out of that deal. Now, when we think about the title of Darwin's primary book, it's On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And the key thing is that he was talking about the origin of species from already pre-existing species, right? They're already there. And now he's talking about, well, how do we get new ones? So that's why evolutionists like to deny that they have to deal with issues like abiogenesis, or what some would call chemical evolution. Because they're saying we're kind of starting halfway. We're starting with life already here, species already here, and just how do we get new ones, right?
You know, it's a very interesting point he's making there. And I think for those of you who are watching the after show for the Planner Walk Kent after show and my interaction with him, he kept trying to skip, oh, you know, you're just talking about abiogenesis. You're not talking about evolution. But the irony of ironies was he was trying to circumvent the chemical evolution portion and then the arguments that all you need is self-replicating molecules for natural selection to kick in. So they keep making those assertions, but then denying they have to account for the origin, and then saying, well, that's not actually part of evolution, even though it actually is. But the online YouTube atheists and, you know, Clubhouse and other places, Discord, they all just want to dismiss all this stuff or just claim, oh, it's already accounted for. I don't have to even concern myself with it because it's already solved, even though it's not. It's kind of crazy. Oh, what's up? A Gangster Ghost in the house. And let's see. I think I saw Pigs Can Fly. What's going on, man? How you doing? Hope work's going well. Hope you guys had a great drive. So those of you who don't know, quick interjection. A couple days ago, or actually it was past Sunday, actually, Matt and his whole family were driving through Nashville on their way to North Carolina. And I get to meet in person. We had some awesome IHOP. Got to meet his beautiful kids and lovely wife. Had a good conversation. We had a good time. And then they were able to head on off the rest of the way to North Carolina. But it was great to meet them. So that's the, let's see, second person I've met on YouTube. I've gotten to meet in real time. And the other one's actually in the house, Jungle Jargon. I'm Jungle. I got to say this again. Many thanks to Jungle, because the computer I am still using is one that he gave me on his way out to Missouri. He swung down, took a little bit out of his drive to Missouri from New Jersey, and actually gave me a computer, which was very generous of him. And thanks again for that, Jungle. And yeah, Jungle, the point you were talking about on the with the speed of light, to me that makes so much logical sense and completely remains. It doesn't have to change the constants. The constants remain the same post wave function collapse. To me, that I don't know why people seem to reject that logic, because I haven't heard a solid rebuttal of my position other than, oh, that's not how it works, when I'm not arguing for any changes to the conventions post wave function collapse. So anyway, okay, let's get back to Ken.
As if, incidentally, just labeling yourself an evolutionist means that you're not responsible for dealing with anything else. I mean, I'm not sure how that works, but they use that a lot. They'll use that to abscond from having to deal with issues that are inconvenient to their worldview, just by saying, hey, I'm an evolutionist. I don't have to bother with this other stuff. It doesn't work, but it is convenient to do what would be called running away from issues. Now, nature.com says the allele frequency represents the incident of gene variation in population. In a population, allele frequencies are a reflection of genetic diversity. Changes in allele frequencies over time could indicate that genetic drift is occurring or that new mutations have been introduced into the population. Bottom line, it just refers to what some people call microevolution. That's pretty much it. And of course, the evolutionary line is that if you compile enough microevolution, you'll get macroevolution, right? Now, microevolution is something we could all agree on. It's just what we would call changes within kinds. But they're saying if you compound enough of those little changes within kinds, you can then jump to macroevolution, which is the origin of new species from other already pre-existing species. So that's just so that you're aware of that. And so, yeah, with all these changes and updating of Darwinism, the way Vox Day put it is, if you can manage to keep up with adaptive default punk aetheroi neo-quasi-Darwinism, or whatever the evolutionary biologists are calling this week's spin on St. Darwin's dangerous idea. So for instance, we have a very popular cyber atheist who says that he's not a Darwinist, he's an evolutionist. Okay, because they're recognizing that, forget all this Darwin stuff, you know, we're just on the bandwagon of the latest spin on his views and the latest theory of evolution. Now, as Philip S. Scale put it in Why Do We Invoke Darwin? Evolutionary Theory Contributes Little to Experimental Biology, and that's from the Journal of the Scientist from 2005. He writes, natural selection makes humans self-centered and aggressive, except when it makes them altruistic and peaceable. Or natural selection produces virile men who eagerly spread their seed, except when it prefers men who are faithful protectors and providers. When an explanation is so subtle that it can explain any behavior, it is difficult to test it experimentally, much less use it as a catalyst for scientific discovery. Okay, so that's just some ideas about how the way issues are dealt with and discussed change. And so this is kind of like the latest definition of evolution, and then just how to start thinking about it, because it is supposed to be a theory of everything, right? Ultimately, biology is a science, but we'll find out Darwinism or evolution is a worldview philosophy. And so what Scale is pointing out is that when you're looking at any biological phenomena, and you're just slapping the term evolution on it, it's no longer a viable theory, because you're just saying it explains absolutely everything, which means that it ultimately doesn't really explain anything. Because if you have completely opposite behaviors being labeled evolution, that just shows you it's not a viable concept. Right?
Yeah, he's making a really good point there about the slapping of evolution onto all sorts of different stuff. So evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, you know, there's so many different quote unquote disciplines that just you put evolution in front of it, and then like, oh well, things change, therefore it's evolution. And they may not mean it necessarily in the same sense, but people view it as in the same line. And how could you possibly have all of these different scientific disciplines and, you know, professions that are based on evolutionary theory? That it couldn't be that many if it's not true, right? And the irony of ironies is that so many things, like let's use evolutionary psychology for example, the knowledge we have gained and the shifts and changes based on external factors all necessitate the actions of intelligent agents, and they're not random. Like there's direct reasons caused by intelligent agents, and people just want to ignore that, like not actually get into the underlying principles and find out like, oh well, that's extremely logic oriented, there's all of these calculated cognitive necessities in order for, you know, this next step to occur. Oh wait, but in terms of how the capacities arrived in order to have those cognitive capacities, no, you don't need it. Oh no, we've proven evolution, folks. Look at all the things we do with evolutionary theory. It's like, get out of town, man. And same thing with, you know, we have an evolutionary algorithm that can do. It's like, yeah, dude. So intelligent agents came up with logic, and then we ran it through. And yes, there can be adaptation and potentially streamlining and optimization of a pre-existing function that was created by an intelligent agent. But we're not seeing the brand new things just pop into existence, not the root function. It's amazing how they want to do this. And then they're like, oh, well, no, I'm just talking about, you're talking about abiogenesis. You know, planar walk to the same thing. You're just talking about abiogenesis. No. You are still claiming that from a preceding function, a new one popped into existence through optimization of the preceding one, which is we're observing in real time is not what actually happens. And both in things that humans are trying to do, as well as from a biological perspective, we are not seeing that. But anyway, we're going to rant. Let's get back to Ken.
Right. So online once I posted an article that was titled "Ancient Spiders Locked in Amber Died Looking After Their Offspring." I posted this on our Facebook page, by the way. And so my comment was, to quote the article first, 98.8 million years, and then I wrote worth of evidence of lack of evolution. Because, I mean, how do they know it's a spider? Well, because it's a spider and it looks like a spider. It was a spider back then, it's a spider today. So that's evidence of lack of evolution. And somebody was kind enough to reply to me, this has already been explained to you. If a species doesn't need to evolve, then it won't. There must be a selection pressure which causes it to evolve. Okay. So I replied, do you troll the World Wide Web demanding adherence to other theories? We'll get back to that in a second. So I told him, I wrote 98.8 million years worth of evidence of lack of evolution. You agree with me. If a species doesn't need to evolve, then it won't. You agreed with me. We've been through this, that theory predicts X and also the exact opposite of X, right? So I was just applying what Skell was talking about. So that we have evidence that spider is the same back then as it was today, but that's also evolution. Even though it didn't evolve, the theory still says, hey, we got that covered basically, right? We got all the bases covered. Now, in my mind, as far as the meta level stuff, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who lives 1646 to 1716, is said to have asked the premier philosophical question when he stated, the first question that should rightly be asked is, why is there something rather than nothing? Okay, something what? Anything. Why does anything at all exist instead of nothing at all existing? Why? And that is the premier question. And I've come to find out your answer.
And you know what's so interesting about that point he's making is, obviously this applies to the Kalam, it applies to, every cosmological argument in existence, the fine-tuning problems, I mean, all these things, right? And it's amazing to me how, even though that question has been being asked since whenever the day he just said, long time, hundreds of years, and probably way before that in reality, the fact that modern Evo-Atheists claim we can just dismiss that, or I don't need to know, or we'll find out how in some time in the future, we'll figure out how something came from nothing, or, in Krauss style, well, when I say nothing, I don't actually mean nothing. Yeah. And it's like, or on the flip side, you have it doesn't necessarily have to be nothing. There could be additional, outside universe, but it still doesn't mean that there wasn't something that was necessitated in order to cause this universe to come to be in the manner in which it is, and then factor in all of the additional components which are indicative of intelligent agency. And, oh, well, we can circumvent that because of, if we have basically infinite multiverses, then everything can be accounted for in our universe being completely by chance rather than the actions of an intelligent agent. Even though in the micro universes that we create inside of, gaming platforms, things of that nature, we would never argue that those could ever exist, even though we're external to it, that it could come into existence without the intelligent agent. It's very fascinating how this just gets completely ignored in the macro view.
Answer to that question is like a line of dominoes. Once you give an answer, it's just going to kick the whole line down. And all of your views will be based on your answer to that one question. So for instance, if you say, well, there's something rather than nothing just because of an accident, right? Nothing caused nothing to explode for no reason and made everything without meaning, right? From nothing, by nothing, to nothing, for nothing, right? Everything else is based on that. You won't get away from that premise if that's the view you take. Or if you say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then likewise, everything else will follow, just absolutely everything. And that's why it's called a worldview. It's your view of the world. And in this case, it begins with something as simple as, well, why does something this instead of nothing? And that's going to form the core of your worldview. And then that core will inform you as to how to think about everything else, just absolutely everything. Even stuff we might find out about tomorrow. Hey, we just discovered another habitable planet. Well, how you think about that is based on your core. It's all going to be based on that, right? So then just by talking about this, I'm already appealing to logic, even if I haven't realized it or haven't said it or haven't really even thought about it. And so in logic, we have a law such as the law of identity that would tell you that A is A. What is A? Anything. This marker is a marker, right? A is A. A is not non-A, right? This marker is not a non-marker. It is what it is. It's the identity. So A is A. A is not non-A. Like a tree is a tree. And if a tree was not a tree, then a tree would no longer be. And now I'm sounding like Dr. Seuss. Let's see. When we think about logic, that also comes from our answer to the fundamental question, right? So I find that evolutionists will tell me that logic is a human invention, right? Humans developed to the point that we invented logic. Okay. Now, in my mind, it's really, there's two things to think about. And generally, there'll be two things to think about with almost any issue, which is epistemology and ontology. Okay. So like ontology would be the thing in and of itself, whatever it is, the thing in and of itself, the absolute thing on its own, right? Like logic would be, we'll see in a minute. We're going to play a video one in just a second. Okay. Well, epistemology would be how we humans talk about the thing and we think about the thing and we try to figure out the thing. And so that those are two different things, but they're very important to keep in mind that we're talking about two distinct things, the thing in and of itself, and then how we think and talk about the thing. So let's play the video clip one. This is me in a discussion with Tom Jump, who goes online as a T-Jump, by the way, an atheist evolutionist.
So logic is a description of reality. Logic is a result of evolution, which caused us to have these things. So now I have, in my worldview, I now have logic, which allows me to justify things. So my worldview is
I know, but I mean, we both know when we say the word logic, we're really referring to two things. We're referring to naturally occurring phenomena, and then we're referring to our description of that phenomena. Right. So if we say laws of logic, we're referring to the phenomena in and of itself, and we also mean our description that we can put in pithy catchphrases like the law of non-contradiction. That's a law of logic. Yeah, but it's describing what? Well, it's describing reality. Okay. We're going to get back to this because you see that we both say, okay, we're talking about reality. Okay. He an atheist.
I gotta just say that T-Jump's faces always crack me up when he is either attempting to like dismiss a point that's being made or is not grasping a point that's being made. It's really funny. And I think there might have been a combination of that in that little clip that Ken just played, because it was like the first one was, I'm just going to dismiss this. And it's like, wait a minute, am I understanding what he's saying here? And obviously I think he does, because he's heard those arguments, very similar things about, the laws of nature and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. I think the desperation to avoid the reality of Platonic concepts and abstracts being separate from the strictly material is so devastating to the Evo-Atheist worldview that they are, in a level of sheer desperation to avoid conceding even a fraction of their existence to be anything other than material. And I don't know, the aspect of what governs everything. Well, and the ultimate irony for me on that is that they're searching desperately for a law of everything, the universal law of everything. They're searching for this 100 years now, and it's like, so you're looking for the thing that controls everything, but ultimately, if there is a creator, then the creator would be the law of everything ultimately. So you're actually desperately searching for what is God in terms of the arbiter of what is reality, while simultaneously claiming that that can't possibly exist, but you're searching for it. It's pretty funny.
Evolutionist, me a believer, creationist, we agree that reality exists. I mean, you can't have a hard time disagreeing with that unless you're like deep into the New Age. That's a whole other issue. But we're both appealing to reality. But keep in mind that his answer to the primary question and mine are different. So his view of reality and mine are going to be different. Ultimately, at the level of epistemology, we're going to get back to that. So I wanted to read a quote from C.S. Lewis. Okay, yeah, we would have issues with his view on evolution, but I think he hit the nail on the head when he wrote about something that he variously called life force philosophy, or creative evolution, or even emergent evolution. And this is from Mere Christianity, chapter 4, What Lies Behind the Law, where he says, one reason why many people find creative evolution so attractive is that it gives one much of the emotional comfort of believing in God, and none of the less pleasant consequences. When you're feeling fit and the sun is shining, and you do not want to believe that the whole universe is a mere mechanical dance of atoms, it's nice to be able to think of this great mysterious force rolling on through the centuries and carrying you on its crest. If, on the other hand, you want to do something rather shabby, the life force, being only a blind force with no morals and no mind, will never interfere with you like that troublesome God we learned about when we were children. The life force is a sort of tame God. You can switch it on when you want, but it will not bother you. All the thrills of religion and none of the cost. Is the life force the greatest achievement of wishful thinking the world has yet seen? Now, my college level biology textbook by Neil Campbell and Jane Reese, in the glossary, it defines evolution just as any and all changes that have occurred to organisms. Okay, if I ask you who believes in that evolution, we'd all raise our hands. So that's just part of how we need to think about and how we need to define terms and ask people to define their terms. Because if someone has that definition in mind, they ask you if you believe in evolution and you say no, they're going to be like, okay, you're just out there, way too far out there. So if you say, well, but that's not exactly the definition of evolution that is used in discussions about evolution, or how it has been used historically, and how the historical use of the word has changed, right? So that's why in the intro, atheistic evolution was mentioned. So I want to distinguish. That's what I'm talking about tonight. And yes, in my many discussions online, I've referred to atheistic evolution, and I've been called the dumb for doing so. They didn't really use the word dumb, and so I would say, well, have you heard of theistic evolution? Yeah. Well, then there's atheistic evolution. Like, how is that even something to argue about? It's the view of evolution where it just happenism, right? Time did it, chance did it, matter did it, did it all by itself, nothing did it. Well, however you want to look at it, that's a whole different ballgame from our friends, the theistic evolutionists, or even deists, right? Deism would say that God, created the universe and then just kind of walked away and let it run itself. So that, yeah, evolution happens in the universe. It's virtually atheistic because God isn't involved at all, just kind of did the initial design and just let it run itself. So that's somewhat akin to theistic evolution. And I remember, by the way, when Probable came into town, someone took him to eat at Cracker Barrel. And he said there was this woman sitting outside, and as he was walking up, she said, "What is deism?" And he was like, "Well, I've just been reading all about it." And he starts telling her it's an idea that came about in the late 1800s, and this is the motivation for it. And it's the guy created it and stepped away, and he's going on and on and on. And his friend tapped him and said, Lee, she didn't say what is deism. She said, "What is deus?" I just wish I could have seen her face, What is deus? And this guy starts rambling on about these, Yeah. So theistic evolution, deism, and then intelligent design, all of those are kind of pretty much in the same category. Okay, yeah, there's some distinctions here and there, but pretty much in the same category. And so when you're talking about theistic evolution, of course, who is the theos? Well, it could really be anybody. Who is the deos? Could be anybody. And like with intelligent design, same thing, right? So there's Jewish intelligent design proponents, such as David Berlinski. There's Christian intelligent design proponents, such as Michael Behe. There's agnostic intelligent design proponents, such as David Berlinski. And there's atheist intelligent design proponents, such as Francis Crick, who proposed directed panspermia, right? That life ended up on Earth from being brought from elsewhere in the universe. And so that's why I'm talking specifically about atheistic evolution, is to not, within this talk, get into the issues of those who would say that God had something to do with it. We're talking about no God involvement.
I love how Andrew continues to prove that he doesn't actually pay attention, because he says, FYI, I've already known that Darwinian evolution wasn't the whole story in biology for quite some time. Now, it isn't news in any way. So Ken actually addressed that already, number one. Number two, while what you said may be true in reality, there is a plethora of individuals on YouTube who don't seem to grasp that very much and are still clinging to a lot of the old school stuff. So anyway, Andrew, if you're not responding to me, but it's something that's already been addressed in the thing that we're reviewing, maybe you should pay attention and just not talk inside chat if you aren't actually paying attention to what's being reviewed, because that's already been, your point's already been addressed. And Lori Hayes, hey, are you ready to lose some brain cells listening to these people? Well, we all know that Lori Hayes doesn't have enough IQ points to grasp the vast majority of the concepts being put forth. So I'm pretty sure that you've already lost more brain cells than are required to actually comprehend these points. But, whatever.
Whatsoever, right? So now a word about neo-Darwinism, which is really just a modernized version of Darwin's theory, but that was incorporated with genetics, because genetics weren't a part of Darwin's original theory. There was really no such thing back then. So that was kind of added to it. But I did want to point out that there's a certain local intelligent design proponent who works at a certain nationally relevant lab, and I remember he had said something. So I emailed him and I said, "You noted that you use neo-Darwinism in your work at the lab. Are you referring to algorithms?" And he replied, "In my work, we use mutation and natural selection to improve the performance of enzymes. I also use that approach to adapt organisms to break down waste. It is a very weak mechanism, but it can help for some things. I can improve already existing functions." Okay, I wonder if you caught certain qualifying terms in there. Okay. So note that if it was strictly neo-Darwinism, it's just stuff that's happening all its own, right? Blind, random, unguided, uninterfered with, without a plan, without a goal in mind, right? None of that. So let me read that again. In my work, we use mutations and natural selection to improve the performance of enzymes. I also use that approach to adapt almost every word of the qualifying term, organisms to break down waste. There's a very weak mechanism, but it can help for some things. It can improve already existing functions. So then I asked them, so when you say mutation, do you mean that you do things to cause mutations and then select which organisms have the most resultant mutations that are beneficial for the purposes of improving the performance of enzymes? Yes. I hope you can appreciate that, because I had an apologist. That was the whole discussion, and I was like, wow, I learned so much from that. So basically, he is the selecting. First of all,
Now, I'm going to just go ahead and assume that the atheists that are in the side chat probably did not pay attention to what was just said and then repeated, and are probably, if they do pay attention or rewind and listen to what was said, will then immediately start coming up with excuses as to the significance of the point being made and the relevance to the overarching question of how do we exist that scientists claim they don't need to account for on the macro level, and we can just accept happened without observation via extrapolation. Yeah, they won't actually think about that. But pay attention, folks.
using intelligence, right? Using intelligently designed equipment to design an experiment, and he's purposefully putting little organisms into it, making sure they're nice and taken care of, tucking them in at night, and then he's purposely causing mutations, and then he's purposely selecting just the ones, right? I mean, the whole thing is, okay, it's intelligent design. He's saying that up front, but then don't tell me it's actually neo-Darwinism, right? It's not. It can't be. I mean, as an intelligent design proponent, you are doing intelligent design. That is what you're doing. I get it, but let's not claim that we're doing neo-Darwinism. I mean, if anything, I don't know what you want to call it, mathematics, genetics, but yeah, so that was, and that's just part of what I mean by the meta level stuff, right? So it's just that I was able to pick out his qualifying terms. I was like, wait a minute, he's actually saying something very different from the blanket claim that it's neo-Darwinism. Okay. So now we come to a very important issue, kind of going back to the whole worldview thing and the answer to the premier philosophical question. Charles Darwin wrote a letter to William Graham in 1881 where he said something very, very important and insightful. He says, the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? Okay, now see, that's very, very important. And you can tell this is beyond biology now. He's like looking at this at a meta level and a philosophical level and saying, well, what does this mean about something as fundamental as the functioning of our mind? Is it producing anything that's actually reliable or trustworthy? Because of developed from the minds of lower animals, right? He's wondering if the conviction of a monkey mind, from whence he's saying it came, or if they have any conviction at all. And the descent of man, he said, in a series of forms gradually increasing, in a series of forms graduating incessantly from some ape-like creature to man, as he now exists, it would be impossible to fix on any definite point when the term man ought to be used. Okay, so he's talking about how in our evolution from what he had previously said were monkeys, now he's updating it to apes, and there's a difference that we can't even really pinpoint. When does an ape stop being an ape and start becoming a man, right, a human? And that was Darwin way back then. Flip two, please. This is Richard Dawkins just a few years ago.
I'm an ape. I'm the I'm not. Yeah, definitely I'm not. I'm special. Made in the image of God. In the creative mind of God. Creative as God is, who made me. That's the difference. The Ammi. But I'm an ape. I'm an African ape. I'm very proud to be an African ape. Yeah. I'm such a being.
Yeah. Right, food for destruction. How do you spare before fall?
Now, it's funny that the Evo-Atheists on YouTube claim that nobody still holds to any aspect of Darwinism. I mean, that's just, it's been debunked for a long time. Well, what's kind of funny, I'm pretty sure it's still claimed that we well, A, we're apes, and B, our descendant, our common ancestor was. So you do have to somehow derive the differentiation between, like, where does Homo come into play from the evolutionary perspective? I mean, that's the point that's being made here. And if you don't get that, then I think you may still be a mental child and are not mature enough to actually grasp the significance of the points being made.
But also, nothing's really changed, right? According to Richard Dawkins, he himself is an ape, like right now. And so are we all, of course. Okay, so that's a very important claim to keep in mind, that they're claiming that through blind random processes, however you want to put it, evolved from apes or still apes, or however the individual atheist evolutionist wants to put it. But I mean, this is like now. And so the question, when we think back to what Darwin said, is, well, what is truth? Right? And I mean, that's something Pontius Pilate asked him. Apparently, he didn't know that one he was speaking to said, I am the truth. So, what's all this stuff about truth? That's something that we're going to get to here. And so, part of my point.
Okay, that's the end of part 1. Give me 1 second here. Okay, this is part 2. There we go.
Tonight was, well, what do atheist evolutionists want? That's something just for now to think about. What is it that they want, right? We all had discussions with them. What do they want from us? What do they want? And the second here, we're going to play clip 3. I would imagine the annals of lectures about creation and evolution, and there's probably not many lecturers to show a video clip from a Charles Bronson movie. But I'm going to show this one because it appealed to me how they discuss issues of truth. So let's play this.
Longer. Why are you whites in my country? Do not ask the whites of the country. Shakespeare gave us these tales as a home. You say, I do not really become civilized. We do not want your civilization. It's spoken. Red truth. Tell me then, white truth, long hair.
In the first place, the Great Spirit did not give you these skills. You took his land by force. From the Cheyenne to Shawnee, the Arapaho, you took a plan to come out. Now the white man makes war on you. What's the difference?
The whites have no honor. The white man wants death comes out of season.
That's a thing called progress.
The thing called greed. Tell me this. Am I evil because my skin is red? Is it a wicked thing that I was born or my father was born? Is it a bad thing that I would die for my people?
It's still red truth and not real truth.
Tell me this true truth, then. You read John's word. Belarus is extinct.
The city pool was a boy. This would throw 10,000 warriors into battle. Today it's the white man's turn. Those you have seen on these hills and on the plains are a handful of these. There are many. They are more than the plains of spring grass, more than the buffalo and the smell of the earth in their great herds. There's no way to stand against the white man. The weapons are terrible. They have the power. You will bend to the long knives of struggle. You will live as they say or die under bayonets.
Go straight to the temple. If such is the true truth, then I will sing my death.
No. I'll not have your death.
Why not? You are white.
First I am your brother. And your friend.
Long hair. Yes. There should be no war.
That's from a movie called The White Buffalo. And so what really stuck out of me is that they're trying to name it, well, you're speaking red truth. And he's telling the honkies, you're speaking white truth. Right? But then, and it's still red truth. It's not real truth. So he said, well, tell me this true truth. Right? So the red truth and the white truth are more like perspectives. But they finally get to, well, what's the actual ontological reality, right? That's the real truth. That's the true truth. And I love that was straight tongue. So that's something that what kind of motivated me to start thinking about this, and also presenting talk about it, is to get beyond. Well, that's why I'm asking, what do they want from us, right? They want us to accept their perspective or the actual real truth. What are we getting at, really, right? So now, one of the issues is that when we look back to Darwin's book, it referred to natural selection, and so that's not the intelligent design proponents. Neo-Darwinism is intelligent selection. It's actually natural selection. If there's anything about which I agree with Richard Dawkins, it's when he said that In nature, the selecting agent is simple and stark. It's the Grim Reaper. That's it, right? Natural selection. It means something falls over dead or it doesn't. That's pretty much it. You put a St. Bernard and a Chihuahua in the North Pole, one of them's going to fall over dead. The other one is. But one of the issues when dealing with evolution, philosophically, I guess, or just common sense, is that, okay, so there's evidence of natural selection. There's evidence of what's called adaptation. There's evidence of what's called variation. There's evidence of what's called speciation, even. And I'm granting the difficulty of defining the term species. But the issue is you have evidence for all these, but then evolutionists just came along and say, hey, these all belong to us. And now we're going to call all of that evolution. And now we're going to claim that all of that evidence is evidence of evolution. That's one of the main problems right there. Is that it's natural selection, adaptation, variation, speciation. Let's just call it all evolution, and then we'll claim that evidence is ours, right? That's something to keep in mind, incidentally. And another thing to keep in mind that once I noticed it, I started reading about it, I can't notice it all the time, is evolutionary storytelling. I was just listening to a debate today between evolutionists and creationists. And I thought, wow, that answer the evolutionists just gave was literally just a story. Zero evidence. It was just a story motivated by the evolutionary narrative. That's what it was. And then let's listen to video clip number 4, just for a little word about that from Stephen Jay Gould.
Human beings as storytelling animals, and we like our stories to go certain ways. We don't really care much for Ecclesiastes type stories about all rivers running to the sea and the sea not filling up. They don't go anywhere. We like stories about trends. We love trends because then either something's getting better, we can celebrate, or something's getting worse, we can lament. We seem to like to do both with equal frequency, depending on the season. And therefore, I think that so many scientific things that need to be explained, but that need to be explained in the narrative mode as stories, fall prey to a peculiar kind of bias. We don't pay enough attention to. Scientists and historians and commentators of science are very used to analyzing politically based biases, socially based biases. But there's also a form of literary bias in which, when, for example, we're saying about the history of life, which is an intrinsically historical theme in science, we manage to tailor our stories to fit into the kinds of tales we know best. We like to make them tales about trends. I just like that, which isn't so much about trends. If you ever really look in detail at the histories of theories about human evolution, you might think that they and their changes are based primarily on increasingly better data from the fossil record, but so much of the standard way of looking at human evolution is really just a reflection of the standard themes of myths and sagas. We have the hero who's conventionally veiled. In fact, until recent feminist critiques, almost the entire story of human evolution was, I'm getting some awful feedback here, were often just the stories of what men do. You never quite knew where the women were. They were presumably sitting around the hearth taking care of the kids, but you didn't get it in the narrative. So much the conventional narrative was the birth of the hero going out, and it was almost like Parsifal and the Red Knight all over again. And so I think that's a very important theme. And what I want to talk about today is the way in which we've had wrong views, and in fact, curiously inverted, not only just wrong, but precisely opposite to the way in which we can find better explanations because of our desire to find trends, and because of our desire to tell stories as tales about trends.
Well, it's too bad he's not interested in Ecclesiastes talking about the sea never filling up, because that's part of the Bible's prediction of the hydrological cycle page. Who's to bother with that? Now, Lucille Landau has done a fair amount of writing about storytelling and what's supposed to be science. So, for instance, in Human Evolutionist Narrative, published in American Scientist in 1984, she writes, scientists are generally aware of the influence of theory on observation. Seldom do they recognize, however, that many scientific theories are essentially narratives. They may be unaware of the narrative presuppositions which inform their science. One scientific discipline that appears open to the importance of narrative is paleoanthropology. Certainly, a number of recent articles and books on the subject of bias in the study of fossil men, including one titled "The Myth of Human Evolution," that's by Eldridge and Tattersall in 1982, suggest that paleoanthropologists are aware of the literary aspects of their study. Multiple interpretations and ambiguity are no strangers to readers of evolutionary biology. By comparing the narrative roles played by fossil scientists may become more explicit about the subjective and often highly imaginative ways in which they reconstruct human ancestors. Note, by the way, she said scientists are generally aware of the influence of theory on observation. Right? It should be that they're aware of the influence of observation on theory, right? I mean, that's precisely backwards. But it's true, right? They have a theory in mind. That's their worldview lens. And now they're making observations. and what they see is informed by their worldview bias, rather than saying, hey, I'm observing this, and now I'm formulating a theory based on that. It's easy to kind of get that backwards.
So the points that are being made there about the foundation of the point he's making is that some people like to just avoid accounting for the root assumptions to their position. And it's very, 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 very common on both sides of these arguments for people not to understand the root concepts. But moreover, in my opinion, the atheist side, they just dismiss any need to account for it because naturalism at some point will solve the unsolved and will somehow be able to overcome the points that are being made. And the irony is that they claim to be, rational empiricists, but are actually grasping to tremendous amounts of faith in order to defend their worldview, even though very often they admit they don't understand the points that are being made to counter their worldview and stab gigantic daggers in the heart of their worldview. It's an ongoing point. And Redefine Living makes a good point. He says, but John, Evo-Atheists don't have presuppositions. Well, absolutely. It is ongoing. But, and you know what? I think Andrew's going to get timed out again because he's really just annoying the crap out of me. He makes these same stupid points over and over again. And, Andrew, you're banned until you go learn basic. I'm just going to keep putting you in timeout until you go learn the basics of communication theory, because until you understand it, you're a waste of time. Let's get back to Ken.
She also was quoting from The Baron and the Trees, a presentation to a conference on variability in human evolution in 1983, where she noted that paleoanthropologic literature is, quote, thick with interpretations, not about what the fossils look like, but also about what they mean, right? So that's a whole different ballgame, and we need to kind of train ourselves to distinguish, like I did with the statement from the intelligent design proponent, is like, well, wait a minute. When are you describing what you're seeing when you look at a fossil and what you found and where you found it and all that versus what it means, right? Roger Lewin in Bones of Contention was quoting from Human Evolution, The View from Saturn in the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, Recent Developments, 1985. And he wrote, metaphors cast powerful spells not only in everyday life, but also in science. When Stern and Sussman say, quote, afferences had traveled well down the road towards full-time bipedality, not only do they speak in metaphor, they also tell a story. Okay, so now, as far as storytelling, video clip 5 will show us what happens when Richard Dawkins is trying to tell a story and the story fails him. We'll see what happens.
So there isn't a process as we're going on in the cell saying, look, be patient.
No.
It's going to be a feather, believe me.
Yes. It doesn't happen like that. There's got to be a series of advantages all the way in the feather. If you can't think of one, then that's your problem, not natural selection's problem. Natural selection, well, I suppose that is a sort of matter of faith on my part, since the theory is so coherent and so powerful.
That's like one of the core features of his atheistic evolution. And we see he turns out to be a man of faith, right? It's like, oops, I got nothing here. Well, it's faith, I got faith. So now, MetaApologetics, like I said, talking about the big picture and the answer to the premier philosophical question. When we think about Genesis 1:1 stating, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, there we have that in the beginning, that's time. God created the heavens, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. How is it that 3.5 millennia ago, some ignorant goat herder, as atheists tell us, or the guys who wrote the Bible, how did they know the most up-to-date cosmology? How did they know that the most up-to-date cosmology tells us our universe is a time-space matter continuum? How did they know that? Incidentally, I'm going to throw this one in for free. So I think when it says the heavens and the earth just refers to matter. Just God created matter. And guess what? It was formless and void. And then he formed some of that matter into the planet that we call the earth. So that's just my take on what that's all about. no gap, no nothing like that. God creates matter, it's formless and void. Some of it he forms into the earth, and then he starts talking about what's going on in the earth. So I kind of would think that when, especially in one single verse, we get modern day cosmology, it might be worthwhile taking that text seriously and considering what it says. There's other aspects of this because we see that God is the one who created time, space, and matter. So then he must be beyond or outside or without a need to exist in that time, space, matter. So he would be timeless or eternal, spaceless, or without being subject to a particular locality or omnipresent, and immaterial or spirit. I mean, there you have a basic theology and a basic cosmology in one single verse. And there's so much more there, like, well, God created the heavens and the earth. So he's viably bringing forth a plan that he has. So there's intelligence involved. There's potency. He's omnipotent. He's able to create these things. I mean, there's so much you could dive into in one single verse, not to mention that as Genesis 1 continues, then you have predictions of some of the laws of thermodynamics, such as conservation, right? God's creating, and then stops. God rests from his work. He stops creating. So then within that system, assuming it's closed, yeah, energy changes, but there's no more being added to it. It's conserved, right? It might, matter might change into energy. The energy may become unusable, but there's no more coming in. That's a prediction right there, another one. So now, what we have in Genesis also is that the evening and the morning, it's the first day in the evening and the morning, it's the second day in the evening and the morning. And then you have organisms reproducing after their own kind, right? So you have this system of cause and effect, right? Like linear time, chronological time, one moment followed by the other, right? Linear time, I always say, boy, I tell you, it's just one thing after another. Linear time. And that's important.
So I'm getting entertainment from the side chat right now of Andrew comes back out of timeout. First thing, Hurricane Havoc, I haven't seen you address them. Would you like to converse sometime about ERVs? Andrew, I think we've all seen you converse about ERVs. I mean, how many times have you and SFT conversed about ERVs? You know, I think at some point this can just be, you know, we can agree to disagree on the points or just keep watching for the new information. And, you know, either you can just keep clinging to your position and people can rebut your position and cling to their position that the answer that you put forth is not the correct one. And it relies on a tremendous amount of assumptions all the way to the root level and a formal rejection of any and all design and engineering principles that would directly explain, maybe not 100%, but a huge portion of the logic for their locations. But since you refuse to go and understand those principles, it seems that you're never actually going to be able to regurgitate any point other than ones that are told to you by people like Dr. Danny Boy and their ongoing, clinging to it being, the only conclusion is that it's proof of evolution.
For us in terms of building a worldview, because really the scientific method, okay, not just science in general, not just observation in general, not even just experimentation in general, but the rigors of the scientific method were based on biblical theology as the mother of the philosophies, because the view was that a rational God created a rational creation and populated it with rational beings who could therefore rationally discern it. And that's why we can do science. And that's not only why we can, it's why we should and why we ought. And that is going to become very important as we get close to wrapping this up. That's a huge difference between can and should or ought, or the is ought distinction, as a lot of people call it. There's a difference between is and ought. We're going to get back to that in a second. And so from that, we learned that God created his creation in a certain way so that it's discoverable, so that things make sense, so that one thing follows from another. And that's why scientists all over the planet can say to each other, hey, I conducted this experiment this way. Can you reproduce it? And if they can, it's because things in creation are the way that God created them. If not, then there's probably just something wrong. And that's often how scientists correct each other. Wait a minute, there's something wrong at this step or whatever. But that's...
You know, the intelligibility problem for the atheist worldview never ceases to amaze me. And the fact that so many of them want to dismiss it or not even address it, I think is very indicative to a lot of the points that Ken was making in his discussion. And he gets into much more detail here in a few minutes, is if it appears that things are intelligible and there's all these laws that govern things and make them intelligible, and the principles of engineering, communication, logic, all of these things are necessary for all these things to exist, you, as I mentioned earlier, you ultimately have to come to the conclusion that either A, there is a mind behind all of these things, or somehow chaos became extreme order, and all of the precise rules that are necessary somehow came to be by themselves with no preceding cause, and then ultimately culminated in what we contemplate as reality and ultimate existence. And as I always say, I just ask you, is it remotely coherent, even in a imaginative position, even if you want to make this purely theoretical? Can you create a universe in your own mind like ours without these rules? And if you can't create it without rules, then you have to conclude or come up with a explanation for how the rules exist. If you don't have an explanation for how the rules exist other than, oh, they just do, and there is no necessity and necessary cause for them, well, I think you're avoiding the obvious, without either through refusal to think deeply or blind faith that somehow it will be answered and you just don't need to worry about it, while simultaneously claiming that anybody who believes in God is blinded by faith and cognitive dissonance due to their brainwashing in religion, which is just so ironic.
That's the reason they can reproduce experiments if the experiments are well done. It's because you don't have different laws of physics across the planet, right? God created order. So this gives us the premise, the ability to then do science and do logic and do philosophy, right? The philosophy of science. And not just can, but that we must, right? And that's a distinguishing feature of our worldview, is not just that we can do these things, but that we're called to know the truth. Truth exists. It exists on purpose. And we're called to know the truth. And truth ultimately ended up personifying. Well, on the other hand, we see that what evolutionists do is they also turn evolution into a worldview. That does become their worldview. Because then, by definition, everything that exists, including humans who they view as apes or related to apes, well, they just evolved. I mean, we're the result of a long series of happy accidents, ultimately. We weren't designed, we weren't planned, we're not the end result of a goal. We just happen to exist, our brains happen to exist, our thoughts happen to exist, logic happens to exist. And so that's why I had asked the evolutionists, do you troll the World Wide Web demanding adherence to other theories? Because my experience has been no one else in any other field has, I demand that you believe in this theory because it's true, or whatever, however they want to put it. It's like, well, because it's a worldview to them. And that's why if you challenge an evolutionist on any point of biology, they tend to lose their minds. Let's just put it that way. Because to them, you're not actually just talking about biology. You're touching the core of their worldview and you're threatening that. That's been my experience many times. So that's why I would ask, do you troll the World Wide Web demanding adherence to other theories or just evolution? Just evolution. And note that that's my point, is that that's one thing they want from us. They're demanding adherence to it. They want us to accept it.
It's a really good point he's making there about the demand to adherence. demand for adherence. And I can only imagine the report that little Andrew will be making to Speed of Pudding and the gang, and how they'll just claim that there's no need for adherence when nobody's actually suggesting that, when simultaneously saying anybody who doesn't agree is uneducated, uninformed, or refuses to accept for faith-based reasons and such. And it's pretty funny how that proves itself over and over again, continues to be what's observed in a testable, repeatable fashion with YouTube atheists. It's truly amazing. And whilst as Ken just said, simultaneously claiming that evolution has nothing to do with their worldview, except for the fact that it is the foundation of why they can reject God.
Okay. And now what follows from that, turning evolution from a theory that is supposed to be about biology into a worldview, what comes with that is also that evolution and therefore atheism become neo-pagan. It's a pagan worldview. And so let me quote from Romans 1 as to why that is. Because it refers to the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For the invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Okay. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and here it is, exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal men and birds and animals and creeping things. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Right? So if nature gave birth to us, then we should worship nature, right? If we come from other animals, that's why you have these fantastical exhibits at museums where it's almost like a cathedral, right? And you're coming to visit the relics, as it were. So that's why I'm saying it's pagan. It's neo-pagan. Is because it is a form of nature worship by definition, if you're looking to nature as your creator. And so let's get back to my buddy Tom Jump and the discussion that we had about logic. So what he had said is logic is a description of reality. Logic is a result of evolution, which caused us to have these things. Now I have my worldview. Now I have logic, which I can always justify things. Okay. Now, when he says that, here's what I'm hearing. Okay. This is what I'm hearing. Logic is a description of accidentally existing reality. Logic is a result of accidental, blind, random, chance, etc., evolution, which accidentally caused us to have these things. So now I have my worldview as per accidental cognitive abilities, not necessarily meant to ascertain empirical truth. I now have accidental logic, which I subjectively can, not ought, nor should, nor must, always justify things, even though there's no universal imperative to justify anything on atheistic evolution. Let me take a break there because that was kind of heavy. So if your view of the universe, and therefore all it contains, right, is that it just happened, it's accidental, okay? By accident, I just mean exactly that. It just happened. It wasn't planned, it wasn't designed, it wasn't created, it wasn't meant to be, it's not the end result of a goal, of a plan. It just happened, it's accidental, okay?
So here we have Ken creating the dichotomy. You have either it was designed purposely or it was not. That's where you're at. You have one of the two. No ifs, ands, buts. Same thing with whether or not you agree with the presuppositionalists or not. You have the God world and the not God world. You have the created world and the not created world. You have the accidental world and you have the non-accidental world. Like, there is no way around this. This is the choices you have. Like, well, I don't know which one it is. That doesn't mean that ultimately it isn't one of the two. Either God exists or God does not exist. Either the creator exists or the creator does not exist. Either it is purposely created or is not purposely created. And as in the scriptures that Ken was just reading out there, in the end, man will worship the creature rather than the creator, will become blind, will reject the creator and the evidence for God as divine nature, and will want to pivot and worship something else, which ironically is what humanity thinks we came from. We're willing to basically bow and scrape in defense and, acquisition to the evolutionary theory and to Darwinism. And for all the hyper literal Evo-Atheists in the chat, when I say Darwinism, I don't mean necessarily the original version. I'm talking about the expanded versions of it. But that scripture is extremely prophetic, because I think we are witnessing it in real time, gaining more and more traction in the modern era as humans get dumber and dumber, which is ironic. Like, we're getting dumber while claiming that we can reject the obvious, but then the people who accept the obvious are actually the ones who are getting dumber when the critical thinking skills of the Evo atheists continue to get just astonishingly bad. But anyway, okay, let's get back. Almost done. Sidebar, folks. I got it pinned inside chat. We got like three more minutes of this, and then I'm going to stop here. There's 2 more parts. I'm going to stop here. We're going to do a short after show, and then I got to bounce out about 2 o'clock. So if you want to join and have a little quick discussion, link is pinned inside chat. You'll click on that, and then, like I said, we got like 3 minutes left in this part of Ken's lecture.
Now, if the universe is accidental, then truth is accidental, because whatever is true within that universe is accidental by definition, right? So then reality is accidental. And I like to say that truth or that facts are nuggets of truth based on reality. When you talk about truth, you talk about reality, you talk about facts, it's all really the same thing. It's a description of what's just out there in the universe. And if it's accidental, then truth is accidental, reality is accidental, facts are accidental. You're just talking about the brute fact of what is out there. And if what is out there is accidental, all that follows, right? Like the line of dominoes. So that's why I'm saying logic is a description of accidentally existing reality, right? So then logic is accidental on that view. It has to be, right? Because ontologically, logic is just whatever's going on in the universe. And by definition, it's accidental. So then when we humans accidentally develop to the point where we have brains sufficient so that we can actually start talking about it, epistemology, we can start discerning that reality, that logic, then we're just describing accidents. Okay, A is not non-A. That's a good law of logic, but it's just accidental. I'm going to say that 1,000,000 times. And really, on this view, we're applying random, accidental, biochemical neural reactions going on within our haphazardly evolved brains to have what we call thoughts that are the result of predetermined reactions based on the accidental laws of physics, by the way, to then conclude things about logic and the universe. I mean, the whole thing is just based on one accident after the other. But fine, let's go with it. Okay, so it's all accidents. But we're here, we're humans, we have brains, we can think, and we can observe reality. It doesn't matter that it's all accidental. We can do that. Okay. So let's go back to Tom, because he also said it's describing logic. It's describing reality. So reality exists. Logic describes reality. Our brains exist. They are in reality. And they describe reality with logic. So now we have logic. Now we have fallacies. We can now use those as justification. Okay, so now here's what I hear him saying. It's describing accidental reality. So reality exists accidentally. Accidental logic describes accidental reality. Our accidental brains accidentally exist. They are in reality accidentally, and they accidentally describe accidental reality with accidental logic. So now we accidentally have logic. We now have fallacies as brute facts, sure, but without a universal imperative to condemn them. I'll get back to that in a sec. We subjectively can now use those as justification. Yet again, there's no universal imperative for providing justification on such a worldview. Okay. So.
Okay, we're going to end at that point, but I'm going to rewind it just for a second. Let's re-listen to the little play on words he just did there, because I think it's very significant, and hopefully the Evo-Atheists in the room will pay attention to what he's saying here and the significance of it.
I mean, the whole thing is just based on one accident after the other. But fine, let's go with it. Okay, so it's all accidents. But we're here, we're humans, we have brains, we can think, and we can observe reality. It doesn't matter that it's all accidental. We can do that. Okay. So let's go back to Tom, because he also said, it's describing logic. It's describing reality. So reality exists. Logic describes reality. Our brains exist. They are in reality. And they describe reality with logic. So now we have logic. Now we have fallacies. We can now use those as justification. Okay, so now here's what I hear him saying. It's describing accidental reality. So reality exists accidentally. Accidental logic describes accidental reality. Our accidental brains accidentally exist. They are in reality accidentally, and they accidentally describe accidental reality with accidental logic. So now we accidentally have logic. We now have fallacies as brute facts, sure, but without a universal imperative to condemn them. I'll get back to that in a sec. We subjectively can now use those as justification. Yet again, there's no universal imperative for providing justification on such a worldview. Okay. So when he's saying we now have fallacies.
All right, so we're going to wrap up there for today. There's two more chunks to go in that lecture, but I thought it was... we'll cut off there, because so we'll do about 30 minutes of after show for anybody who wants to join. We've got a couple folks here, and just kind of discuss what we've been listening to, and maybe go to other topics. But if people want to join, link is pinned inside chat. And without further ado, we've got Ghostman Jungle Jargon join us. Ghostman, you were first. What's up, man? How you doing?
Oh, hi. Have you ever heard of this guy named King Cockadog?
I've heard the name. I don't, off the top of my head, I'm not remembering what he's done, but I remember the name.
He says the code you talk about is not same as regular information code. I don't know. He said that before. I seen it on his show. What do you think?
He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's well established in peer-reviewed literature. I've done ridiculous amounts of presentations on this, discussed it ad nauseum. The atheists who continue to claim it's not actually code, they don't understand code theory. They don't understand what information is. They don't understand what actual code is. They try to cling to things like the surface level dictionary definition from a higher level language perspective, and they don't grasp what machine code is, and how the information, which is a reduction of uncertainty, is just the statistical portion of it, not the semantic and pragmatic components. They don't know that there are ongoing expansions of information theory, and that you don't have to start and stop at the very first paper on the subject from 1948. Because Claude Shannon himself, who wrote the original paper that they claim removes the necessity to expand on, beyond all this stuff, he developed the Shannon-Weaver model of communication systems and expanded upon this whole deal of what's necessary to be accounted for and what is information. So the idiots like this guy you're referring to, and many other Evo-Atheists out there who continue to cling to this, or just refuse to go and actually learn for themselves and regurgitate talking points, they're a waste of time, because they're not actually addressing the fundamental root concepts that have to be accounted for.
Yeah, even Richard Dawkins says it's a code.
Yes, Dawkins has even done. He did a video with John Perry, stated casually and stated clearly. It's his channels. Dawkins did an interview with John Perry, both of who are atheists. Perry and Dawkins are atheists, and they did a 2-hour stream, which I reviewed on my channel, about why atheists on YouTube need to stop claiming the genetic code is not a code. And just two atheists went into a whole exposition about why you are an idiot if you keep claiming the genetic code is not code in the literal sense, and yet it continues to be regurgitated over and over again.
I think you show evidence to godless engineer. He still denies it.
Well, godless engineer is a moron. I mean, he doesn't actually. I really think he's an idiot. I mean, an actual idiot, because he continues to do videos, regurgitate talking points that aren't even agreed upon by other atheists. Like, he's a mythicist. He doesn't even think that Jesus actually existed. I mean, that's such an outlier. I mean, him and what's his face, who's the Richard Carey or whatever. Like, there's a few. The mythicists are a outlier fraction of the atheists, and I mean, okay, if you're a reject of the rejects, then you got a problem. I'm sorry. Jungle, welcome to the stream, man. How you doing? What's on your mind, brother?
Yeah, hello. I just want to stop in and say hi, everybody. You know, and yeah, the atheists really have nothing. Evolutionists have nothing. Andrew Cumming keeps talking about ERVs, but that's nothing, because that's information that comes from the genetic, information. So, I mean, they don't have anything. I mean, you can't even explain the existence of matter without a supernatural cause. But they just don't get it, and they hand wave everything. Oh, it was evolution did it. What's evolution? It's scientific. No, it's not. No part of it is scientific. It's just total nonsense. And these people keep falling for it. Like they have to or something. Like somebody's making them. But anyway.
Well, you're making a good point, and I was outside of Nashville the other day, and I was driving through some farmer fields, and I came to this intersection, and there were 3 different tractors parked in this field, like right at the intersection, right? And each one of them had a different built-in component for some kind of farm function, right? And what really struck me as I was looking at these tractors is, you could probably argue that 80 to 90% of each one of those tractors was the same, right? The motor, the frame, the wheels, the cabin, the steering wheel, the ignition, the exhaust, the diesel tank. I mean, the whole 9, right? But then these hyper specific components on the front end, and then other ones on the back end, right, were highly detailed, very deep, like machinery, right? And then it just amazes me how on the Evo side, they want to just claim that, oh, well, from the evolutionary concept, that sort of thing, the physical output, right, could be potentially modified from an existing one, right? And theoretically, okay, not as detailed as these are, but let's say you're going super rough and you're wanting like a slight modification. Okay, fine. You might be able to, if you are a machinist and have the other tools you would need to be able to cut these parts off and whatnot, okay, maybe you could do that. But from the manufacturing perspective, and what you also have to account for in biological systems, you ultimately are talking about the formation, not of the end machine. You're talking because you don't have the formation of that machine until you have the information that's necessary to form the machine. And in this context, the proteins here, right? But
Exactly.
from a manufacturing perspective, you still would have to have the design and the schematics for, even if 95% of the tractor is the same, you still have to have the information of the new part that you're going to add on to it. And that must exist prior to the formation of the part you're adding on. And that's just a fact. That is an unavoidable fact. And the same logic applies. Even if you want to claim it can slowly build over time, you still have to somehow form this information. That is unavoidable reality. And it's why I dismiss the clown shows that come on here and make these arguments, dismiss things like the code even existing. But it's like nobody in science is arguing about the code anymore. They're arguing about like how the information came to be. They're addressing what the information is and how comprehensive it is and the multiple layers to it and all these different things. They're like 1,700 layers past what the Evo-Atheists on YouTube argue over. And it's like, guys, at some point. I know you're desperate to cling to your worldview, and you're afraid that, most of the scientists are just arguing about the science, right? They are categorically refusing to address the teleology and the ontology that are implicated or indicated by the things that they're studying. There's like, oh, well, we're not even going to talk about that part. We're just going to look and see what it does, right? Anyway, enough of my rant on that stuff. It just blows my mind how people just want to dismiss what we're talking about now.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room that nobody, I mean, everybody's pretending not to see. Nobody acknowledges the elephant in the room. And they're going about their business and as if they don't even see it, you know.
Well, what's sad about that point, Jungle, is in reality, the ones who are actually doing the real research, not the Evos, not the Evo biologists and stuff. Oh, well, how did it magically form? The guys are actually going and doing the real research of how things work and function and disease research and such. They're, per their own admission, are applying engineering principles, in this case, reverse engineering principles, to how they figure out how things work. Like, they're hiring engineers, they're hiring computer scientists, they're hiring information scientists, they're hiring all these folks that have to come in to do the analysis in conjunction with the biochemists and everybody else, right? Otherwise, they can't figure out how it works. Like, if you have to have knowledge of all those different disciplines working in conjunction to figure out how those things apply all of those different principles to result in an end function, and then you're going to sit here from the origin perspective and be like, oh, well, none of that applies. It was just done through all these little fancy schmancy words we're going to toss out and claim somehow magically, account for these ultimate formations. And let's mix in a little, let's add a dash of time into the equation, and presto, that's what happened. It's just, it gets me every time.
Yeah, there's a lot of physics and quantum mechanics and everything that you have to understand just to figure out biology, and plus the information side of it, the overlapping information, the response to the environment, all that stuff. There's just so much that goes into making a biological organism. And of course, we're not even close. But the point being is that it's probably the highest level of science there is biology.
Well, have you been to Dinosaur Adventureland? LPP?
No, I have not.
Ken Hover, he wouldn't need a guy like you. You're a genius.
No, I'm not a genius. I'm smarter than average, but I don't claim to be a genius. I just take time to go, and I'm an extremely curious individual, and go and look at things. And professionally, my background is like in figuring out how things work and can work, and solving problems or providing solutions to new problems, and simultaneously having to learn the different models of a business or an industry or whatever, and apply another set of knowledge from a technology standpoint to their problem and come up with a novel solution. And I am quite certain that background is what has enabled me to be able to quickly grasp biological systems, the fundamentals of biology, chemistry, physics, etc. And I mean, I had earlier knowledge from college and stuff, but at the same time, being able to apply the professional experience into just a different market, right? Is biology. It's way more fascinating, more complicated, more just incredibly intrinsic to my very existence, which is why I find it so fascinating and spend so much time in it. But the fact that people want to dismiss the same concepts being necessary to be accounted for in biology as anything else crack me up. It's fantasy land, as Ken was talking about in his lecture.
Yeah, they like to say evolution did it, but then if you ask them how, they can't explain to you how evolution came up with the information that wasn't there to get the function like what you're talking about. that's required, or the end result. So the end result of every living organism is different. It doesn't matter how they grow the same or how much alike they look. It's the end result that is from the information in the genome, which people should have known before they even discovered the genome. So,
well, and what's the takeaway is a good point. So I didn't know about evolution being completely unscientific. So I agree with you. There's scientific concepts that are being placed into evolution, and I would also say that you can derive certain aspects of understanding from what evolutionary biology is turning into outside of the, like, it's a name that's being applied to understanding incredible complexity, engineering, and so on and so forth. That's the point I was making. But if you actually look at it, it's a bunch of hand waving for the how did it get here, right? Like, oh, we're analyzing the genetics. Okay, cool. So you're doing an audit of the code, and then claiming the evolution, quote unquote, portion is how did this code magically form itself? That's evolution. The other stuff is, holy crap, look at the similarities in this code, look at this code, look at this, all this kind of stuff. And here's the similarities, the engineering similarities from a coding perspective in all these different systems and organisms, right? Like, oh, well, there's information transfer going on here. Oh, well, let's just hand wave and say that somehow this one magically formed this one. And through this extenuated process of all these little micro changes in the code, ultimately this new function comes, because we need now to understand how this function exists based on the code that's necessary and the expression of said code to result in the three-dimensional objects, which make up the overall combined make up the systems that result in X function. Like, congratulations, you're doing a freaking code audit. Like, that doesn't mean you are proving that the code created itself at all. Like, that's what cracks me up about this, and it seems that concept seems to go over the heads of the vast majority of Evo-Atheists out there, which is why I say go learn the basics of code theory, and like what machine code is, assembly code, and like all this. Go learn what that is, and then apply those necessities and both from a chemistry perspective as well as an information perspective, and then really contemplate the plausibility of your hand-waving explanations.
that's why they're still evolutionists, is because they don't understand, what the code is and how the code, determines the outcome, the end result of the organism. And you always said you can't get here from there. You can't get the information required by making mistakes. It just doesn't happen. Especially not in limited time and space where we are. Not in 20 billion years can you get, a single common protein, But they just keep on holding on to their faith because they need it. They need to have evolution, because otherwise there's a God, So, but they don't actually take the time just to understand that evolution doesn't work. There is no mechanism for getting written programming that's not there. It's just nonsense. It's just total nonsense. It's just so annoying.
Well, one of the things I find so ironic about this is, because they have observed in real time, not in evolutionary time, but in real time, they've observed to some extent reorganization of genomes, right, or portions of genomes, and from an adaptation perspective, right, they've observed this in real time. But if it's happening in real time, then, and it's in direct response to a new threat or new variable, then that would be indicative of cognition being expressed in order to, in real time, operate like an AI, potential AI, and leverage machine learning to solve a problem based on utilization of existing capacity to create a new solution, right? Like that's what we're trying to accomplish with machine learning, right? Okay, so we have observed this, but even if that is true, and even if that could result, we haven't observed this, but let's say that those kinds of actions could result in formation of entirely new organisms and body plans and such. Let's say that could happen, okay? Hypothetically speaking. That directly pulverizes evolutionary theory, right? Like all the talking points and the fundamental principles that they rely upon, it just completely obliterates them. And the fact that reality seems to go over the head of most of the YouTube Evo-Atheists just cracks me up to no end. Like, you guys are missing the obvious. But that's just me. Who knows?
PC Myers, he just says it's chemo. What's it
Chemical
called?
reactions and chemistry, biochemistry. Yeah. Well, PC Myers, I'm just going to be honest. PC Myers is old. And just like Dawkins, they're clinging to their own. I mean, PC Myers has been trash talking just like Dawkins for decades now. He's now old and he's in the validation stage of life. And it has been shown, it's been studied at the wazoo, that when you're in the validation stage of life, you can be presented with information which directly contradicts your position. However, if it has been a fundamental component to your life, people in the validation stage, it's not exclusive, not 100%, but the vast majority lack the capacity to make the mental shift. This has been studied at the wazoo. And we observe this in politics, right? All the time. Using it as an example, we have old people in Congress and bureaucracies and all these talking heads and the think tanks and such. They have professionally been in favor of, say, Keynesian economics for 50 freaking years. They have advocated for, they have voted for, they have pushed all of these socialist Keynesian policies on to the United States, for example. Even when economists come out and say, well, the data is now in on a global level that these policies suck, they fail, and they don't work, and we should probably shift, the politicians double and triple down on their positions that are outdated. For those of us who are, observing this and have basic understanding of economics, it's like, okay, so the data's in, you're wrong, make a pivot, and then they refuse. Same thing with like monetary policy. Like we're about to, the United States is about to freaking implode because Western civilization in general is about to implode because of modern monetary policy and the freaking printing, and we just inject more capital into the market and keep interest rates low and everything's going to be fine. We can solve all these problems. Let's go into a bubble, cyclical bubble economies, and like it'll be all fine. We can just inject more money. Well, guess what, folks? We are observing hyperinflation. Well, we're not quite hyperinflation in the United States yet, but significant inflation, and we're like on the borderline of hyperinflation. And the second the United States loses reserve currency, we're freaking toast. And all of the dumbass policies of the lefties and some of the quote-unquote righties in the United States for the last 50 years is going to result in the United States becoming a third world country. And that's just reality. It's an unavoidable truth. And people don't accept that. You have to accept it, but you're going to be dealing with the outcomes very soon. And that's one of the reasons that Jungle is going to be pretty safe. He's got some land, he's got water, he's got tractor, he's got diggers, he's got all sorts of stuff. Jungle's going to survive. You got some solar power too, didn't you, Jungle?
Yeah, I have air conditioning and my well pump, and my lights run off of solar power. Yeah.
Nice. How much to run your AC? How many kilowatt hours are you needing?
I have 3 lithium iron phosphate batteries. They're each like 105 amp hours each.
Okay.
Which is not a whole lot. It's like the bare minimum, and it'll still run my air conditioning all day and all through the night until the morning. But then if it happens where I, use up all the battery, then it'll just use electricity from the grid. And then as soon as the sun starts shining, it's back again.
Nice. Okay, so here's a question. How many? So I've got a 400 watt hour panel. What do you have for your panels? Like, how much do you have there?
I think I have 8, about 400 watt panels.
Okay, so hang on. So you have 8 400 watt panels, or you have 800 watts?
I have 8 400 watt panels.
Okay,
So,
gotcha.
And
okay, so
plus I got about 800 more from 100 watt panels.
Okay, so you're being able to charge those batteries up super quick.
By noon, it's up to 55 volts. It's a 48 volt system, but when it's up to 55 volts, it's pretty well charged.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because I don't have any of that fancy stuff yet. The percentage of the battery, what's left, and all that stuff. It's very, very simple. But it still works great. 240 volt system.
LPP. Have you ever met Aaron Raw?
No, I have not. I know who he is, but no, I've never met him.
Yeah. He's he always trying to debunk creationism. Says creation. How could they explain? I forgot what it's called. Something to do with how separate species from each other. Like what's the original kind and stuff. What would you say?
No, I mean he's always doing his the phylogenetic challenge. I think that he does. That's a long conversation. I've only got like 5 minutes left. That's a long one to get into. But there's that whole deal is he relies on some very dogmatic assumptions and assertions in relation to his position, and any daggers to his foundational presuppositions he just completely rejects. And it's like, that doesn't exist. It's pretty funny, actually. But of course, we're also talking about the guy who has been, I've got so much entertainment from his coming out party as a Satanist that it was just so unreasonable for all the theists for accusing him of being a Satanist while he's admitting that he was being a closet Satanist for a long time. And now this is his coming out party. But the people who accused him of being a Satanist and, being dogmatic, all this kind of stuff, those people were crazy while he's literally admitting that they were correct. So a lot of his positions kind of get flipped because, like, yeah, okay, bro, we'll take what you say with a grain of salt. But okay, so I gotta roll out here in 4 minutes. So let's do last words, and thanks so much for everybody for joining us in the side chat as well. Ghostman, you got any last words?
Have a good day.
Appreciate you too. Jungle, any last words?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about Aaron Ron, his phylogeny thing. He's, of course, that's hand waving, like you were saying. That's just, evolution did it without even accounting for where the information's coming from. So that's just total nonsense to begin with. And God bless everybody. Take care.
No, appreciate you very much, Jungle. Okay, folks, I hope everybody enjoyed this little relatively short impromptu stream here. Thanks, everybody, for doing the super chats, for all the members, for having great conversation in the side chat. And as you consider all the different things that are discussed here and elsewhere, and you contemplate the arguments and the assertions made by both parties, both camps in these ultimate discussions regarding our existence and the fundamental necessities for it, make sure that whatever conclusion you reach, it is logical, plausible, and probable. Have a good night, everybody.